Did you know America is divided between voters supporting and opposing the idea of mail-in ballots for the 2020 presidential election? My purpose today is to persuade you to support no-excuse mail-in ballots for presidential elections. I care about this topic because I am a working-class citizen that cares about my kids and the future of the country that they will be growing up in. So I conducted some research to ensure that I provide current and accurate information. Whether you are a lawmaker or a concerned citizen, the common factor that unites us is our investment in the future of America. The choices we make about mail-in ballots today can have a far-reaching effect on our democracy. After hearing what I have to say, I am confident you will agree that supporting no-excuse mail-in voting for presidential elections is right for America. I will begin by describing the problem, then explaining some of its causes, and conclude with my solution. With our roadmap in place, let's begin with the problem. The problem is some people oppose no-excuse mail-in ballots for presidential elections. An example of this comes from an October 13th article, "Mail-in Voting Became Much More Common in 2020 Primaries as COVID-19 Spread," published on the PEW Research Center's Fact Tank website, which indicated opposition to mail-in voting remained at 49.7% during the 2020 primaries. In other words, nearly half of American voters oppose mail-in voting. I created a graph and put it into a PowerPoint so you guys can take another look at an example of this. As you can see here, this is a graph of the number of people who oppose mail-in ballots. This first line right here, there is 60% of people who favor voting by mail without giving a reason. That leaves 40% of people who oppose voting by mail. This one right here, this is 48% believe in voting by mail and having no voting in person. That leaves a very large number, 52%, of people who oppose voting by mail. This graph was a poll conducted in April of 2020 of 1,057 adults nationwide. So as you can see, there are a lot of people that still oppose mail-in ballots. Another example comes from a May 20th, 2020 article, which indicated the Republicans' National Committee and the Trump campaign dedicated at least $20 million to voting-related battles throughout the country to oppose vote-by-mail measures. What this means is that most Republicans oppose mail-in voting for the presidential elections. With the problem in mind, let's take a look at some causes. There are two primary reasons why people oppose no-excuse mail-in ballots for presidential elections. The first reason comes from the belief that many ballots go missing. According to David Mickelson, creator and editor of Snopes.com, a website dedicated to fact-checking since 1994 and considered by many journalists as the go-to site for the truth, between 2020 and 2018, 20 million mail-in ballots remain unaccounted for. And states and local authorities have no idea what happened to these ballots. In other words, people oppose no-excuse mail-in ballots because they believe such a large number of missing ballots indicates significant flaws in election security. However, there is no evidence that missing ballots affected the outcome of any election between 2012 and 2020. Kim Wyman, Washington's Secretary of State, said in an interview, "There were not 28 million lost ballots in the four elections between 2012 and 2018. The ballots were received by the voters, and they chose, for whatever reason, not to participate in that election, and probably put that ballot in the trash or the recycle bin. Not everyone chooses to return a ballot." The second reason comes from the belief that mail-in ballots increase election fraud. This is seen in an article by the Daily Signal on October 15th stating there are many people out there who are taking advantage of the vulnerability in our mail-in ballot system to try and steal their vote or dilute the value of their vote. However, voter fraud is extremely rare. According to the January 2017 article, Debunking the Voter Fraud Myth, published by the Brennan Center for Justice, a nonpartisan law and policy institute, voter fraud rates have remained less than 0.0025% for the previous 20 years examined. Although there have been isolated cases, electoral fraud is very rare. In other words, there is simply no reasonable basis for claiming mail-in ballots increase voter fraud. Now that we understand the problem and some of its causes, let's talk about the solution. The solution, which is to support no-excuse mail-in ballots for presidential elections, offers at least two important benefits. The first benefit is voter convenience. According to a post by Washington Secretary of State Kim Wyman, if you are registered to vote in Washington State, there is no need to request a ballot. Voting by mail is convenient and gives you the time to learn about the ballot measures and candidates before casting your vote. Return your ballot by official drop box or by mail. No stamp is needed. The second benefit is the protection of individual and community health. An article by Elaine Kamark on May 29th discusses that voting by mail is a much safer option than going to a crowded polling place during the COVID-19 pandemic. In conclusion, mail-in ballots need to become more widely supported by voters. Let's review what we have learned. First, we learned the problem is some people oppose no-excuse mail-in ballots for presidential elections, as evidenced by the fact that 49.7% of registered voters oppose them, and the Trump campaign has spent $20 million on stopping the mail-in ballots. Next, we learned two reasons why people oppose no-excuse mail-in ballots, to include the belief that 28 million ballots went missing and the belief that mail-in ballots cause a rise in electoral fraud. However, we now know that there is no evidence of ballots going missing and that voter fraud is extremely rare. Finally, we learned the solution of supporting no-excuse mail-in ballots offers two benefits, which are voters' convenience and the protection of individual and community health. Voting is a constitutional right. Voting is a constitutional right to U.S. citizens. Being able to cast a vote from the comfort of your own home via the mail ensures your voice is being heard in the safest way possible. Now you have learned about how many people oppose mail-in ballots, why they oppose mail-in ballots, and the benefits and solutions to mail-in ballots. You should have enough information to vote by mail in future elections.